The desert air was dry and hot, the kind of heat that made the rocks shimmer in the sun. But Eli Mercer didn't mind. He had seen worse during his days in the Air Force, and now the quiet emptiness of the Nevada wasteland suited him just fine. His truck, dusty and dented, rumbled across the cracked dirt road as he followed the smoke rising in the distance. Something had fallen from the sky the night before, and the news said it was just a meteor. But Eli had seen it flash across the stars with a trail far too bright and controlled to be natural. Curiosity pulled at him, and so he drove toward the crash site, his boots crunching the sand as he parked and climbed a ridge to get a better look. What he saw below made him stop cold. It wasn't a meteor. A large, silver ship's leak, and shaped like a teardrop lay half buried in the sand, still steaming and glowing faintly with a bluish light. Cautiously, Eli made his way down the slope, hand on the grip of the old sidearm he kept in the truck. The closer he got, the more wrong it felt. The air smelled of burning metal and ozone. Panels from the craft had blown off, revealing circuits and glowing wires that pulsed like veins. A soft sound, almost like breathing, made him freeze. Then came a hiss, a low creak, and the side of the ship slid open with a hiss of steam. From the shadows, inside, stepped a figure tall, slender, wrapped in strange metallic fabric. She stumbled out and fell to her knees, gasping. Skin shimmered like liquid silver, and her eyes, large and glowing faintly violet, looked around in panic. Eli stared in disbelief as she spoke in a language that sounded like music played backward. He didn't understand a word, but the fear in her face was clear. Then a device on her wrist beeped, and her voice shifted. "Please," she said, her tone soft and trembling. "Don't let them find me. I beg you, Earthling. I have no one else." Eli lowered his weapon slowly, mind racing. Who was she? What was she running from? "You're not from here," he said, stating the obvious. She looked around, eyes wide, her silver hair clinging to her face. "They'll come. I don't have much time. They'll trace the crash." Her voice cracked with emotion, and she clutched her side, revealing blood silver and glowing spreading through her suit. Despite everything in his body telling him to call someone, Eli took a step forward. "Come on," he said. "You can't stay out here." She hesitated, then took his hand, and he helped her up. Together, they hurried back to the truck, and, as he drove, she kept looking up at the sky like she expected it to fall on her. Back at his garage, Eli hid her inside a bunker he used to store old military parts, locking the doors tight. She collapsed onto a cot, breathing hard. "Cod, I am Kalira," she whispered, "daughter of the Valari Empire. Now, nothing." She closed her eyes, trembling. Eli sat back, stunned. The Valari he'd never heard of them. But he knew enough from her look in the ship's tech to understand she wasn't lying. Hours passed, and Kalira slept while Eli watched the news. They said nothing about the crash. No reports, no government response. Too quiet. That's when he knew they knew. Somewhere, someone already knew what had fallen. That night, as he went to check on her again, he heard something outside wheels on gravel, then silence. He peeked out a sliver in the door and saw an unmarked black van, parked just down the road. No lights, no movement. Then, a tall shape stepped out to tall, and its movements were not human. It scanned the area, its eyes glowing red. Lies. Heart pounded. Whoever she was, whatever she brought here, it wasn't alone. Someone or something was coming, and he had just taken in the galaxy's most wanted stranger. As the stars glittered coldly above the desert, Eli realized he was now part of something far larger than he ever expected. Something not from Earth, possibly not meant for it. The next morning came with a quiet so heavy that Eli Mercer felt it pressing against his chest as he stepped outside. the cool desert wind brushing against his face while the sun rose slowly behind the hills. The sky was calm, but something in the air had changed, something tense, like the pause before a storm. Back in the underground bunker, Kalira was awake. Her silver skin still pale, and her body weak, but her eyes now sharper, more alert. She sat on the cot, gripping a small device in her hand, fingers trembling as she adjusted it. "They're close," she said, without looking at him. "I can feel them. They always follow the crash signature. They always come." Eli didn't like how certain she sounded, but he nodded and returned to the surface, his instincts telling him to prepare for trouble. He checked the sensors around the edge of his property, old tech from his military days, patched together, with parts from satellite dishes, motion alarms, and heat trackers. It wasn't perfect, but it would give him a warning, he hoped. An hour later, the first signal tripped, a soft beep on the console in his garage, and his stomach sank. He walked to the edge of the ridge and pulled out his binoculars. Down the highway, far in the distance, he spotted a vehicle, a black SUV, sleek and silent, moving far too smoothly for the rough terrain. Behind it came another, and then a third. No logos, no markings, no dust raised. Eli whispered under his breath, "To clean. Not from around here." He rushed back to Kalira, who stood slowly when he entered, her eyes already fixed on him like she knew. "They're here," she said. "Krolax." He didn't know what that word meant, but it sounded like something terrible. "They won't ask questions. They're not here to talk," she added. Her voice was calm, but Eli could see fear hiding behind her calm face. He grabbed an old EMP rifle from his supply shelf, a weapon he had built from scraps and old army blueprints. "It's not meant for battle." Before disabling electronics, he handed K-Ra a small communicator. "I tell you to run east," he said. "There's an old mine shaft about a mile away. It goes deep. They might not find you there." She nodded silently. Moments later, the first vehicle rolled to a stop just beyond the property gate. Eli stayed hidden, watching through a narrow slit in the garage wall. The doors opened, and figures stepped out, 3 of them, dressed in black suits, their faces hidden by helmets that gleamed in the light. They moved like machines, too fast, too perfect. Then another door opened, and a 4th figure emerged. Taller, thinner, its body made of black armor that looked grown, not built. It turned its head slightly, scanning the land with red lights. Across its faceplate, Eli felt a chill crawl up his spine. That one wasn't human at all. Suddenly, it snapped its head toward the garage, as if sensing something. Eli ducked back, just as the front door creaked open. Without hesitation, he activated a trap near the entrance, and old microwave rigged to short-circuit when tripped. The blast sent sparks flying, and a shrill noise rang out as the power surged. One of the dark-suited figures collapsed instantly, twitching. The others turned fast, but Eli had already slipped into the shadows, pulling Kalira with him into a hidden corridor that led beneath the garage. The taller creature followed them with uncanny speed, its footsteps silent, but every time it passed a sensor, Eli saw it flash red on his console. He led Kalira into his machine shop, where wires, gears, and broken drones hung from the ceiling. "Stay low," he whispered, pressing her behind a stack of crates. The creature burst through the wall moments later, knocking metal shelves aside like paper. Eli fired the EMP rifle. The pulse struck its chest, and for a brief second, its body jolted, systems flickering. But then, with a horrible clicking sound, it straightened and kept moving. Eli's eyes widened. EMP resistant. He gasped. He barely had time to dive as the creature swung its arm, smashing the table where he had stood seconds before. He grabbed a plasma torch and aimed for the joints. It wasn't much, but the heat caused the armor to hiss and crack. The creature hissed back, an alien sound that made the walls vibrate. Kelleria, still hiding, reached into her belt and pulled out a small, glowing orb. She whispered a word, and it expanded, glowing brighter. She threw it at the creature, and the light burst like a star. The creature froze, spasming, and let out a sound like screeching metal before crashing to the floor. Eli ran over, staring at it, smoke rising from its body. "Is it dead?" he asked. Kelleria shook her head. "Disabled. For now." She looked at him, sweat beading on her face. "That was a death guard, a Krolax elite. It won't stay down forever. More will come. You don't know what you've gotten into." Eli helped her to her feet, breathing hard. "Maybe not," he said, "but you needed help, and I'm not in the habit of leaving people behind." Kelleria looked at him for a long moment, as if seeing him differently. "Most would have handed me over, for safety, for reward. You didn't." Eli smirked, trying to calm his nerves. "Yeah, well, I've always had trouble trusting anyone." In suits. Outside, the other black-suited figures had retreated, likely regrouping or calling in more. Eli knew they had little time. "We need to move," he said. "That old mine shaft might be our only chance to stay ahead of them." Kelleria nodded, but her voice was distant. "If the Krolax have found me this fast, they've already mapped this region. They don't give up. They'll follow my energy signature anywhere on the planet." Eli looked around his cluttered workshop, eyes narrowing as an idea formed. "Then we mask it," he said. "We find a way to make you look like one of us." "You said they're tracking your ship's energy trail." Kelleria nodded again, uncertain. "We junk the remains, strip it, hide it, bury the core." He motioned toward the scrapyard behind his house. "We'll use parts from your ship and mix them with human junk, confuse their scans. Make them think your energy trail ends here." Kelleria stared at him, lips slightly parted. "You think like a Valari scout," she whispered. "We survive." "That's what humans do," Eli replied. As the two moved quickly to gather tools and supplies, the downed Krolax death guard twitched once, its red eyes flickering back to life. Far above them, in low orbit, a silent ship, cloaked in darkness, received a signal and began its slow descent toward Earth. The sun dipped low behind the hills as Eli Mercer led Kelleria through the rusted gates of his scrapyard. A wide stretch of land filled with broken machines, half-buried engines, twisted metal, and forgotten tech from a dozen decades of Earth's throwaway age. And as they passed under the shadow of a toppled radio tower, Kelleria stared around with confusion and disbelief, clearly unsure how any of this wreckage could help them. But Eli moved with purpose, knowing every corner of the yard by heart, every loose cable and discarded satellite part cataloged in his mind, and he guided her toward the back to a covered workbench built from shipping crates and shielded with old solar panels, where he pulled aside a tarp to reveal his private workshop, a strange blend of military surplus, old NASA components, and devices he had built from scrap. And Kelleria raised an eyebrow, not mocking, just surprised. "Okay," as he handed her a drink and began sorting through piles of parts, explaining that if the Krolax were tracing her energy signal, then they needed to bury the signature deep beneath Earth's electrical noise and her ship's damaged core, still pulsing faintly with Valari power, had to be dismantled and scrambled, scattered through decoys. And while she hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of tearing apart a royal vessel, she finally agreed, trusting him in a way that made Eli pause as he watched her hands work beside his, elegant but unsure, her fingers tracing wires with unfamiliarity. And she admitted that while she came from a world of knowledge and light, she had never truly built anything with her own hands, never had to improvise. And Eli smiled, saying that Earth's greatest strength was exactly that humans had learned to survive by building with what they had, not what they wanted. And, as night fell over the desert, the two of them worked in silence, sweat and grit, marking them equally, and slowly, Kilara began to grasp the process, adapting alien tech with human instinct, learning to bend metal with heat, to shape signal filters from salvaged radio parts. And Eli found himself impressed, not just by her intelligence, but her willingness to learn, to fight with tools rather than titles. And just as the final pieces of the ship's core were dismantled, a sudden, sharp pulse rocked the arrow sound not of Earth, causing both of them to freeze. And Kalira whispered that it was a long-range scan, a Krolak sweep, and they had less time than they thought. So Eli grabbed the power regulator he'd just finished and rushed to the far edge of the yard, where he buried it beneath a pile of rusted refrigerators and car parts, attaching a low-frequency pulse emitter meant to confuse any alien sensors that passed overhead. And when he returned, Kalira was crouched over the ship's memory core, debating whether to destroy it or hide it, and Eli told her firmly to keep it, that history mattered, and if she ever made it back home, her people would need more than just her survival. They would need proof. And she nodded, wrapping the core in thick lead sheets to block its signal, then hiding it in an old ammunition box beneath the floorboards of the workshop. And for a while, they sat in silence, both exhausted, watching the stars blink above the scrapyard like distant watchers. And Kalira finally asked why Eli lived out here, alone and off the grid. And he told her about the war, about the mission that went wrong, about losing a friend in a desert, far from home and never trusting orders again. And she listened quietly, offering no pity, only respect. And in that shared silence, a bond deeper than words formed, one of survival and choices made in the dark. And suddenly, alarms flickered on the corner screen motion near the gate, far too smooth to be wind. And Eli grabbed his pulse rifle, while Kalira ducked behind the panels. But it wasn't a death guard. This time, Mitt was a small drone, hovering silently, its eyes scanning. Its design unfamiliar, but clearly not from Earth, and Eli activated the EMP slingshot, a crude weapon, made from magnet coils, and launched a shot that disabled the drone instantly, sending it tumbling into a heap of scrap. And Kalira retrieved it, opening its core with delicate fingers, revealing an active beacon blinking red, meaning they had been marked, and worse, the beacon had likely already pinged its signal to the fleet. So Eli cursed under his breath and said they had only hours. Now, maybe less, before another team arrived, maybe a full squad, and they had to finish fast. So Kalira helped him install jamming nodes at the four corners of the yard, each one shaped from Earth devices, but powered by alien circuitry. And they ran cables through old plumbing pipes and car frames, building a shield network that scrambled signals within a half-mile radius. And just as they powered it on, a low hum filled the air, soft but steady, like a heartbeat of the Earth itself. And Kalira looked at Eli, eyes wide, realizing it might actually work. And Eli nodded, though his hands shook slightly from the rush of adrenaline and fatigue. And as they prepared the last Decoya fake ship core built from scrap metal and radioactive, Kalira stepped back and watched, picking carefully. Then said softly, "You do all this? Not for me. For anyone. You'd help anyone like this." And Eli looked at her, tired but sure, and replied, "That's what we do. Or what we're supposed to do." And before she could answer, the ground shuddered, not from below, but from above. As a shadow passed over the stars, too silent to be a plane, too massive to be anything human, and they both looked up, hearts sinking as the cloaked ship entered the upper atmosphere. A shape like a blade of night cutting through the sky, and Eli said nothing as he loaded the last of the jammers and looked around the yard. Every trap, every trick ready, and Kalira whispered, "This place, this scrapyard, it's not just junk, it's your fortress." And Eli nodded once, saying, It is now. As the sky lit faintly red and the real hunt began, a cold wind swept through the scrapyard just after midnight, brushing across rusted metal like whispered warnings, and Eli Mercer stood on the roof of his old garage, scanning the dark sky while Kalira worked quietly below, adjusting the signal scrambler that kept her hidden from the Krolak scouts circling above. And though the desert night was quiet, there was something in the air, a stillness too heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath, and Eli didn't like it not one bit, because when things got too quiet, it usually meant something worse was coming. And just as he turned to climb down, a faint pulse rippled through the air, barely audible, like the hum of distant thunder without the storm. And Kalira looked up sharply, her eyes wide, saying softly, "That's not them. That's Valari." And Eli felt a twist in his gut, unsure if that was good or bad. "Okay?" And Kalira rushed to the old satellite dish Eli had rebuilt days earlier from TV parts and solar wiring, flipping switches on a custom interface patched together from her ship's tech and an old army laptop. And as the signal grew stronger, a soft blue glow rose from the center of the dish, shimmering like water suspended in air, and Kalira reached into the energy, her fingers moving with instinct, unlocking a message hidden within the pause. And as the light focused into symbols and sounds, a voice echoed through the scrapyard, gentle but full of urgency, speaking in her language but translated roughly into English through the device. And Eli listened as the message told of a rebellion back on Kalira's homeworld, of Valari resistance forces who had intercepted Krolak's movements and learned of their plan to hunt down the lost princess, and that some believed she was still alive, hiding somewhere in the outer systems, and worse, that the Krolaks were preparing to unleash a new wave of biosentinels, not just to kill, but to claim planets by spreading tech-based infections into their systems. It's a method never seen before. Kalira's hand trembled as she realized they had risked everything to send this one message, which might be the last, before the Krolaks silenced them completely, and the voice ended with a simple line, "Kalira, if you still live, find the light spire. Earth may hold the key." And the message vanished, leaving behind only silence and the soft crackling of static. And Eli watched her face, saw the fear and wonder battling in her eyes. And he asked quietly what the light spire was, but she only whispered that it was a legended ancient energy core said to be left behind by the first ones, hidden somewhere in the stars, but many believed it was only myth. And Eli crossed his arms and said, "We don't have the luxury to treat legends like stories anymore." And just then the air changed again, not from a signal this time, but from the deep sound of engines, not above, but below, rumbling through the ground like something was tunneling under them. And Eli cursed, realizing that while the shield had blocked aerial scans, the Krolaks had likely sent in ground crawlers, machines built to dig under defenses and sniff out energy trails like bloodhounds. And Kalira activated a heat dampener, masking their temperature, but the tremors were growing stronger, more direct, like the machines knew exactly where to go. And Eli rushed to the workshop, grabbing 2 shaped charges from his weapons chest, setting them at the edges of the main pit, planning to collapse the tunnel if they got too close. And Kalira warned him that if the tunnel burst too close to the shield generator, they'd lose all protection. And Eli simply nodded, muttering, "Then we better make sure they don't get that close." And for the next hour, they waited, silent, watching as the ground around the far edge of the yard bulged upward, metal scraps vibrating, the sound of metal claws scraping rock growing louder until finally, with a horrible screech, the earth split open and a long, sleek crawler burst through, its body covered in black armor that shimmered like oil, dozens of red eyes blinking in a chaotic rhythm. And Eli shouted, "Now," and triggered the charges, sending fire and stone into the air. And part of the tunnel collapsed, crushing the crawler's back half, but its front remained, splashing and spinning, and Kalira fired a sonic disruptor that made the machine stall, for just long enough for Eli to leap forward with a crowbar, jamming it into a joint and slamming the access panel open, exposing a strange, pulsing sphere inside, unlike anything he'd seen, and Kalira cried out, "That's the parasite core destroy it," and Eli didn't hesitate, slamming the disruptor into it. The machine let out one final scream before going still, smoke rising from its mouth. And the ground fell silent again, but both knew it wouldn't last. And Kalira looked at the broken crawler and said softly, "They've evolved. They're learning from us." And Eli knelt beside the parasite core, examining the strange circuitry that looked almost alive, like vines made of metal, and something clicked in his mind. The message from the stars, the new tech-based infection, the way the machine seemed to merge with the ground, the air. Even the old scrap around the man, he realized this wasn't just a hunt anymore. It was a test, and Earth was their proving ground. And Kalira stood slowly and said, "If they're already experimenting here, then we're running out of time." And Eli agreed, knowing they had to find the light spire, or at least uncover what the Krolaks were after on Earth before it was too late. And Kalira suggested the message might have used old Valari coordinates, a system that didn't match Earth's maps directly, but with the right translation tool, they might be able to find the location it pointed to. And Eli said they'd need to get to a high-powered data relay, something that could cross-reference interstellar coordinates with Earth's geography. And Kalira nodded and replied, "Then we head to the old observatory in Blackstone Canyon. It has what we need." And Eli stared at her, surprised, because he hadn't mentioned it yet, but she said softly, "I read your maps while you slept," and though it should have felt invasive, he smiled instead, pressed again by her resolve, and, with the scrapyard now exposed and the shield system weakened, they loaded what they could into Eli's old solar-powered truck, sealing the Valari memory core in a light line case and locking the parasite sample in a steel box surrounded by coolant cells. And as they rolled out under the early dawn sky, Kalira looked back at the scrapyard, her voice steady but sad as she said, "This place was more than a hiding spot, was your sanctuary." And Eli answered without turning, "It was never about the place. It's about what you're willing to protect inside it." And as the truck disappeared into the desert, the remains of the crawler twitched once. And deep underground, a new signal pulsed out, silent and hidden, calling something even worse. To Earth, the road to Copper Ridge twisted through silent canyons and forgotten ghost towns, with Eli Mercer's truck bouncing over cracked asphalt and dusty trails as the sun climbed higher in the sky. And in the passenger seat, Kalira sat with the Valari memory core on her lap, her fingers tense around it, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. And though they had escaped the scrapyard before another crawler arrived, Eli knew it was only a matter of time before the Krolaks tracked them again, especially now that they carried not just one piece of forbidden tech, but two. And as the observatory finally came into view, A's old dome, half buried into the ridge, weather-worn and silently, slowed the truck, peering through binoculars for signs of life. But there was nothing, just still air and sun-baked rocks. Until Kalira whispered, "We're not alone," and Eli followed her gaze to a shimmer in the distance, barely visible, like heat mirage, but sharper. And that was when he saw it-cloaked figures, thin and insectal, standing motionless along a far cliffside, watching, waiting, damn, their outlines flickering like shadows on water. And Eli gritted his teeth, muttering that they were scouts, maybe early units preparing for an ambush, and they had to move fast before the full force arrived. So they drove straight to the observatory gates and broke inside, finding dust-covered consoles and old computers wrapped in spiderwebs. And while Kalira rushed to set up the memory core and link it to the telescope's ancient data relay. Eli dragged broken furniture and scrap to block the main doors, turning the place into a temporary fortress. And the tension in the air thickened as the sun dipped low, painting the ridge in copper light and giving the place its name. And just as Kalira activated the interface, the floor trembled, the same deep vibration as before. "Only stronger now," she whispered. "They're tunneling again." And Eli grabbed his rifle by setting up charges along the lower floor, then returned to help Kalira finish the alignment. And on the cracked screen, numbers began to flicker, translating Valari's star coordinates into Earth location data, until a map appeared showing a canyon far south, one with old mining tunnels and a strange magnetic signature, perhaps the resting place of the light spire, or whatever the message had meant. And Kalira backed away from the console just as sparks flew from the floor and a panel burst open, revealing a new crawler smaller than the last but faster, its legs clicking with terrifying speed. And Eli opened fire, driving it back while Kalira overloaded the console to destroy the data trail. And the crawler screeched as the relay exploded, but it wasn't alone, 'cause more shadows darted across the ridge now. Krolak's death guards in full armor landing silently from above using gravity packs that made no sound. And Eli cursed, telling Kalira to run to the roof while he held the lower level. And she hesitated, refusing to leave him, but he barked at her, reminding her she was the reason this mattered. And so she fled up the stairwell as Eli placed the last 2 charges near the base, then opened fire again, drawing the enemy toward him. And above, Kalira reached the telescope chamber and activated the emergency beacon. Eli had stashed in his pack a human tech flare gun tied to a wideband signal pulse, hoping that someone, anyone, might still be listening out there in orbit. And as the beacon flared into the sky like a comet, the ridge lit up with red light, and Kalira turned just in time to see Eli retreat up the stairs, wounded but alive, bleeding from a gash in his leg. And he threw her a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, saying, "I hate losing my own battles." And then the roof shook as a death guard landed beside them, tall and cruel looking, his voice like a shriek through static. And Eli lunged forward, slamming the disrupted core into its chest. And the death guard staggered, flailing as the energy pulsed through it. But another leaped from behind, pinning Eli down, and Kalira screamed, grabbing a broken piece of the telescope's frame and driving it into the creature's throat. A burst of silver light flashing as it collapsed, and Eli gasped but managed to push himself up, muttering, "Remind me never to make you angry." And then came the worst sound yet, a deep, rumbling horn that echoed from the canyons below, and Kalira froze, whispering, "They've sent the harvester." And Eli didn't ask what that meant, because he could see it for himself, massive, form rising from behind the cliffs, a biomechanical beast taller than the observatory, with tendrils of black steel dragging behind it like roots. And Eli grabbed Kalira's arm and said, "We're not stopping that here." And she nodded, both of them running down the emergency fire ladder as the observatory began to shake apart, the harvester's feet crushing stone with each step. And just as they reached the bottom, Eli triggered the last set of explosives, sending the upper dome into flames, burying the data relay and blocking the crawler tunnels beneath. And they ran for the truck, Kalira firing pulses behind them as more scouts appeared. But the death guards seemed to hesitate now, like they feared the harvester too. And once they were in the truck and racing away, Kalira looked back and saw the great creature pause beside the burning ruins, its many eyes scanning the wreckage, as if thinking, calculating, deciding what to do next. And then, instead of chasing them, it turned south, toward the canyon from the map. And Eli realized the truth: it wasn't just hunting her anymore, it was heading to the spire, whatever it was. And the Krolaks wanted it just as badly as she did, and he gripped the wheel tighter, pushing the old truck as fast as it would go over the rocky roads. And Kalira said softly, "If it reaches the spire, before we do, the galaxy may not survive." And Eli just nodded, the firelight of the burning ridge fading behind them as the stars began to appear overhead, and in the silence between them. They both knew that the final battle was close, and Earth was no longer just a hiding place, had become the last line of defense. The desert night was cold and silent as Eli and Kalira drove toward the southern canyon, guided only by starlight and the fading signal locked in the memory core. Their truck bumping over rough dirt trails as the wind howled through broken rocks like ghosts whispering warnings. And Kalira sat straight, with her eyes locked on the horizon, knowing the harvester would be there soon, already on the move, drawn by the same coordinates, the same power source. And Eli gripped the steering wheel tight, his legs still bleeding under a torn bandage, but his focus sharp, because this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a stand. One final stand, not just for Kalira, not just for Earth, but for something bigger. Something that no longer had a name. And as they neared the edge of the canyon, the earth seemed to hum, like something ancient beneath them was waking. And Kalira leaned forward, pointing toward a narrow ravine that led down into a deep cave hidden between slabs of red stone, saying, "It's there. I feel it." And Eli parked the truck behind a wall of boulders, grabbing the disruptor and the last 2 energy cells they had, then followed her into the narrow gap, their boots crunching across dry sand as the walls rose high around them, like the jaws of a beast. And soon the light faded, and they reached a large cavern, glowing faintly with blue light from beneath the ground. And Kalira knelt, placing the core onto the stone and pressing her palm to it, whispering words in her language that echoed across the chamber like soft music. And slowly the ground responded, shaking gently, and from the center of the cavern rose a massive structure, ancient, smooth, and shaped like a tower of light made from crystal and steel, pulsing with a soft rhythm like a heartbeat. And Kalira stared at it with awe and fear, whispering, "The spire. It's real." And Eli looked at it and felt something stir in his chest. Not fear, but something close to hope, though he didn't trust it. Not yet, because a deep growl rumbled through the stone then, and dust fell from the ceiling as something massive moved outside. And Eli turned to the cavern's mouth and saw the harvester descending the ridge, slow and terrible, its legs crushing the rocks as it moved, its eyes glowing brighter now, sensing the spire's power. And Kalira stood and said, "I have to bond with it. Will only respond to Valari blood." And Eli asked, what would happen if she did? And she said softly, "It would choose its queen, or destroy me if I am unworthy." And Eli said nothing, only nodded, then turned to face the entrance, setting the last charges along the rocks while Kalira approached the spire, her hands glowing as she reached into the energy field. And outside, the harvester let out a deep, grinding roar and sent a wave of death guards into the ravine. And Eli stood at the narrow entrance, gun raised, waiting, watching the first of the enemy approach, firing with deadly aim, buying time as Kalira's body began to glow with soft blue light. Her voice rising in song now, not words, but tones that echoed through the cavern like an old memory. And the spire responded, pulsing faster, rising higher, its energy wrapping around her like a cloak. And Eli shouted for her to hurry as the first wave reached the rocks, and he triggered the charges, sending fire and rubble crashing down to block the path. But it wouldn't hold long. Kiru sank to her knees as the light engulfed her, her eyes closed, her voice soft and strong. And Eli ran back to her side, just as the harvester forced its way through the fire, tearing stone apart with its massive limbs. And Kalira opened her eyes, now glowing silver, and said, "It's choosing." And Eli looked up at the spire as it cracked open like a flower, revealing a throne of light within, floating above the ground. And Kalira stepped forward, rising into the air as the energy lifted her, and then, in a flash of light, the spire sealed itself again, and a deep tone echoed outward, shaking the entire canyon, and the harvester froze, its limbs twitching, confused, then shrieking in rage. But it was too late. The spire had awakened, and it had chosen her, and Kalira descended slowly, now, wearing strange armor of light, her voice no longer soft but commanding, and she raised her hand, sending a beam of pure energy toward the harvester, striking its core, and it staggered backward, letting out a horrible cry as his body began to crack and melt, and death guards turned to flee. But Eli wasn't done. He ran forward and tossed his last disruptor into the beast's open chest, watching as it exploded from within, and the harvester collapsed into the canyon, smoke and broken metal raining down like a storm, and silence returned, broken only by Kalira's steady breath, and she turned to Eli, her voice quiet now, saying, "It's over for now," and Eli dropped his weapon, finally allowing himself to fall to his knees, laughing breathlessly, and Kalira came to him, placing her hand on his shoulder, saying, "You believed in me, even when I didn't," and Eli shook his head and said, "No, I believed in us," and together they stood in the heart of the ancient spire, two souls from different worlds, bound by a war they never asked for, but chose to fight anyway. And, in the days that followed, the world changed. The signal from the spire went out across the stars, a beacon of unity and resistance, calling those who were still free to rally to a new banner. And when the Velari resistance received the message, they sent envoys, not to reclaim Kalira, but to kneel, for the spire had chosen her, and through her, humanity had become part of something greater. And in a solemn ceremony held among the ruins of Copper Ridge, where Earth soldiers and Velari warriors stood side by side, Kalira was crowned not just as a princess in exile, but as a queen of two worlds, chosen not by birthright, but by courage, with Eli standing at her side, not as a soldier, not as a savior, but as the one who had reminded her she was never truly alone.